You're in the elevator after the meeting. Only then do you remember exactly what you wanted to say and exactly how you would have said it. Bloody useless. 30 minutes ago, sitting in that meeting room, the point was gone. Mid-sentence, you couldn't remember what you were going to say. You found your way back, you always do, but now, writing down 14 floors with your coffee in hand, your brain is working fine again. Why did your brain go offline the moment you needed it the most? Your prefrontal cortex went offline. A specific chemical surge in your brain crossed a threshold and shut down temporarily. Every human brain does this under enough stress. I'm Dr. Yura Lašas. I earned my PhD in neuroscience and spent over 15 years working in pharmaceutical research and clinical development. I created ticking biology to bridge the gap between what neuroscience has discovered and what women are actually being told about perimenopause. I have to present a lot. Clinical data, enrollment analysis, budget scenarios. I don't normally lose the train of thought during a presentation, ever. But I do remember one moment. I was presenting to the whole company remotely, walking them through multiple angles of how we could cut costs in a clinical trial without compromising the study. Somewhere in the middle of explaining one of the scenarios, I lost what I was saying. I recovered, good slides help, but I kept thinking about it afterwards. I'm not someone who loses my train of thought. So what actually happened? Turns out a specific molecular event had just occurred in my prefrontal cortex. It's a little less personal when you understand the mechanism. You can't catastrophize a mechanism. That mechanism starts in your prefrontal cortex, and a neuroscientist at Yale, Amy Arnsten, spent years mapping it down to the molecular level. It's great stuff. The prefrontal cortex sits right behind your forehead and runs everything you rely on professionally: planning, decisions, holding a line of thought while you're mid-sentence. It is also the brain region most sensitive to acute stress. Evolution has a very strange sense of humor. Amy Arnsten at Yale spent years mapping what happens inside the prefrontal cortex under stress. And her 2009 paper Nature Reviews Neuroscience describes the mechanism at the molecular level. It has been extensively replicated by others. When acute stress hits, including the anticipation stress, like waiting for others to join your Zoom meeting, your brain releases a burst of chemicals called catecholamines. Think of them like emergency messengers. Two of them rush straight to your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that handles focus, planning, and decision-making. One is norepinephrine, sent from your tiny region in your brainstem called the locus coeruleus. The other is dopamine, sent from a deeper midbrain region called the ventral tegmental area, which is basically the main dopamine supply line to your prefrontal cortex. At moderate levels, both are useful. Norepinephrine strengthens connection between neurons. Dopamine helps you filter noise. A bit of pressure sharpens you. Past a certain level, the same chemicals start suppressing the prefrontal cortex. Arnsten called this the inverted U. What goes up comes down hard. At high concentrations, norepinephrine and dopamine overstimulate the receptors in the prefrontal cortex. Both trigger a cascade that prevents the neurons from being active. Your prefrontal cortex goes offline. Your neurons just can't fire in the same way needed to retrieve the point or a word you're looking for. This is a good time to subscribe if you're following along. I publish one video every week, always grounded in peer-reviewed research. Focus on what's actually happening in your brain during perimenopause. The same catecholamine surge that suppresses your prefrontal cortex simultaneously activates your amygdala and striatum. Not coincidentally, it's a designed feature of the stress response. The amygdala detects threat and fear, while the striatum selects and initiates actions. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes complete sense. If you're being chased, you don't need to construct a nuanced argument. You need to react fast. The stress response hands cognitive control from the slow, deliberate prefrontal cortex to the fast, reactive amygdala. For most of human history, that shift in the brain kept you alive. Your brain can't tell the difference between a predator and a skeptical CFO. Both trigger the same cascade. Both suppress the prefrontal cortex, and both hand control to the amygdala. In that meeting, you're running the wrong system for the situation. The room stops feeling like a task and starts feeling like a threat. Threat mode is excellent for running away from things, less so for strategy presentations. This also explains the elevator. Your prefrontal cortex was never broken. Once the acute stress dropped, the neurons became active again, and the points that you wanted to make came back to you. Unfortunately, in the elevator. Everything that we just covered happens in every brain under acute stress, including men's. Let's see how it connects to perimenopause. Estrogen directly modulates the catecholamine systems in the prefrontal cortex, the exact systems that Arnsten's mechanism runs on. Estrogen receptors are densely expressed in the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. Estrogen influences how neurons in these regions respond to norepinephrine and dopamine. In 2013 paper in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience mapped estrogen directly into the Arnsten stress model. Estrogen is part of the neurochemical environment that determines where on that inverted U curve your brain is when stress hits. When estrogen is stable, it acts as a buffer. It doesn't eliminate the stress response. It helps maintain catecholamine balance in the prefrontal cortex. So acute stress keeps you in the sharpened focus zone rather than tipping you into suppression. During perimenopause, estrogen fluctuates wildly, unpredictably, sometimes day to day. The estrogen buffer becomes unreliable. So on days when estrogen is more stable, your prefrontal cortex handles the stress surge easier. On days when the estrogen is down, the amygdala and striatum get activated sooner and suppress the prefrontal cortex. It can be the same meeting, but it's a different neurochemical starting point. This is why performance during perimenopause feels so inconsistent, not always worse, just less predictable. That inconsistency maps directly onto how fluctuating estrogen influences this brain system. Estrogen also modulates the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in your brain, which is your central stress response system. One of the estrogen jobs is to help the system recognize when the threat is over and tell your body to calm down, essentially applying the brakes on cortisol once the threat is gone. When estrogen is stable, those brakes work well. There's some evidence that estrogen's fluctuations can make HPA axis a little less reliable, but we need more research to understand the mechanism. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in 1999 showed that when perimenopausal women were given estrogen supplementation, they showed reduced cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine responses to a standard stress test compared to a placebo. The research on estrogen and how women in perimenopause react during acute stress is still developing. What the stronger evidence supports is that estrogen influences reactivity to acute stress and recovery from it. There is no strong evidence that would show a difference in cortisol levels between perimenopausal and premenopausal women. The Arnsten's mechanism has very strong support. Estrogen's direct modulation of prefrontal catecholamine receptor systems is also well established. The connection between the two is well supported in neuroscience. What the research can't tell us yet is exactly how much more vulnerable the prefrontal cortex is on a low estrogen day versus a stable one. I'm sure you're thinking by now, so what do I actually do in that moment when I lose the plot? 3 things. First, look at something around. Your slide, your notes, a number on the screen. Your prefrontal cortex can hold the thought right now, but it can't read. You're offloading to an external support while your brain recovers. Good slides exist for exactly this reason. I speak from experience. Second, don't apologize. The instinct is to fill the silence with, "Sorry, I lost my train of thought." No need. Most people in the room haven't even registered the pause yet. You might be the one drawing attention to it. You can have a moment to think about what you're going to say next. You can even say, let me see how best to phrase this. Third, know it passes. The catecholamine surge is acute by design. It is a rapid response system to shut down your prefrontal cortex, but it's not a sustained state. Once there is less pressure, even slightly, the prefrontal cortex comes back online. The moment almost always feels longer than it actually is. Understanding the Arnsten mechanism doesn't stop it from happening. What it changes is what you make of it when it does. A specific neurochemical event occurred during your meeting. It's temporary. It happens in every human brain under enough pressure. During perimenopause, the threshold is narrower on some days. It's not a verdict on your competence. It's not early cognitive decline. It's all biology, baby. If this resonated, do two things. First, share it with a woman who needs to understand what's happening in her brain. Second, drop a comment with a topic you want me to cover next. Your feedback shapes this channel, and I hope to see you next week.